Has NASA just discovered life on Mars? This question is currently making headlines because a research team recently published a brand new study suggesting that the red planet was once actually inhabited. But before you start imagining exotic Martians or high-tech civilizations, we need to lower your expectations a little. In this case, it's not about evidence of current life, but chemical signatures that may indicate past biological processes. Nevertheless, this would be an absolute milestone. After all, the question of whether we are alone in the universe would be a thing of the past. So, what has NASA found on Mars? And why is the discovery considered a potential biosignature? Be sure to stay tuned until the end and find out with us. According to our understanding, water is a fundamental prerequisite for the development of Earth-like life. And in light of this, it's not really surprising that NASA's Perseverance rover has been exploring Jezero Crater since 2021. After all, there are indications that it once housed a prime-val Martian lake fed by a river system. Such a river delta is considered one of the most promising environments for searching for past signs of life. If microbes ever existed on the red planet, this is where they would have had the best chance of survival. A discovery made in 2023 made headlines, a rock that researchers named Chayava Falls, whose surface was adorned with strange dark spots. Experts call this particular pattern leopard spots, and initial analyses suggested that the rock contained complex organic molecules. More specifically, chemical compounds that could be the building blocks of life. However, it is important to note that organic molecules do not constitute direct evidence of life. This is because they can be produced not only by biological processes, but also by purely geochemical reactions. Nevertheless, they provide valuable evidence that liquid water once existed in this region of Mars and thus the conditions necessary for life to develop. In addition, Perseverance's measuring instruments detected unusual concentrations of iron and phosphates. Although such substances can also form without the involvement of living organisms, they could theoretically also represent the remains of ancient metabolic processes. And now once again their research findings are causing quite a stir among experts. Led by geologist Joel Hurowitz, the study's authors were keen not to jump to conclusions. For this reason, they worked strictly with a so-called null hypothesis. That is, with the approach of first doing everything possible to rule out a biological explanation. Interestingly, however, the experts have so far simply not found a purely geological explanation that would be plausible enough to describe the discovery without possible biological processes. But what did Perseverance actually discover? Well, specifically, it found special rock samples in which the rover encountered vivianite and gray minerals that often form on Earth with the involvement of microbes. No explanation without life? Why chemistry alone is not enough. More specifically, we know of such structures here on Earth from ancient lake sediments which are formed when microorganisms break down organic material and incorporate iron or sulfur into their metabolic processes, a process that geochemists refer to as redox cycling. The fact that similar structures are now also being found in Martian rock suggests that such processes may once have taken place on the red planet, possibly with microbial involvement. And now it gets really exciting because Michael Tice, one of the scientists involved, sums it up as follows, quote, "If there had been life, that would be a very simple explanation for what we found. But if there had been no life, it would be extremely difficult to explain." But why is that? Well, quite simply, chemical processes alone, or in other words, those without biological involvement, can only reduce sulfates and sulfides very slowly, or in other words, convert them into other chemical forms. In fact, extreme conditions are necessary for this to happen on Earth. Namely, temperatures of 150 to 200 degrees Celsius or highly acidic environments. However, neither of these conditions can be detected in the Jezero Crater, and there is no evidence that the impact site had undergone such a harsh past. In other words, the null hypothesis does not hold up to real observations in this case. The mineral structures and chemical enrichments simply cannot be satisfactorily explained by purely geological processes, and that is precisely the fact that is currently causing such a stir. It is also particularly interesting that the samples were found in some of the youngest sedimentary rocks in the Jezero Crater. Conversely, this could mean that Mars was hospitable to life for much longer than previously thought. But what does all this actually mean in concrete terms? Have we finally found proof that the red planet once harbored microbial life? Well, it's not quite that definitive yet. After all, final confirmation is still pending. And yet the research results clearly show that the conditions necessary for the formation of these minerals are perfectly suited to biological processes, and that we have thus found one of the most promising potential biosignatures on Mars to date. Mars sensations under scrutiny. Why caution is advised. The bottom line is that enthusiasm for life on our red neighbor is anything but new. As early as the 19th century, astronomers believed that they had discovered channels on the surface of Mars, which were quickly suspected of being artificially created waterways. Today, however, we know that these were merely visual illusions and not the work of an extraterrestrial civilization. The first on-site investigations were carried out by the Viking probes in the 1970s. More specifically, this refers to the so-called labeled release experiment, in which special radioactively labeled nutrient solutions were added to Martian soil samples to observe whether gases were subsequently released. On Earth, such gas release would indicate that microbes are breaking down the nutrients. And indeed, the Viking instruments also registered a gas reaction which was initially interpreted as a potential indication of life. However, and this is the crucial point, other experiments did not yield comparable results, and later discoveries such as the perchlorates in Martian soil by the Phoenix lander explained some of the observations chemically. Perchlorates can destroy organic molecules when heated, causing similar gas reactions without the need for microbes. As a result, the Viking results were anything but conclusive, and the question of life on Mars remained open. Another sensational discovery goes by the name of ALH 84001, a meteorite found in Antarctica in 1984 and identified as a Martian rock in 1996. A team of scientists led by David McKee subsequently reported microscopic structures that appeared to be fossilized bacteria. The announcement sparked worldwide euphoria and was even publicly commented on by then U.S. President Bill Clinton. But in this case, too, the initial enthusiasm was followed by disillusionment. At around 20 to 100 nanometers, the structures were smaller than known bacteria and were more in the size range of viruses. But viruses do not leave fossils behind. In addition, many of the structures observed could also be reproduced by purely geochemical processes. The magnetite crystals, which had previously been hailed as a possible bioindicator, could have been formed by inorganic reactions, and the organic molecules found in the sample were largely the result of terrestrial contamination. More recent studies show that the unusual meteorite structures were most likely formed by the geochemical interaction between water and rock known as serpentinization. In this process, igneous rocks react with water, creating bizarre-looking patterns that are ultimately purely geological. With this information in mind, we realize that a certain degree of caution is also warranted with regard to the latest Perseverance discovery. Previous Mars sensations often led to exuberance and premature conclusions, and NASA therefore deliberately speaks of potential biosignatures, possible indications of life, but by no means proof. Against this backdrop, Perseverance project scientist Katie Stack Morgan also urges caution. She says, currently, abiotic explanation for what we see in these rocks are less likely. Nevertheless, we cannot completely rule them out based on the current results. Why we need the Mars samples on Earth. To finally determine whether the Perseverance samples contain traces of past life, they must be brought to Earth and analyzed in detail. And that is precisely what the Mars Sample Return mission is designed to do, an ambitious collaboration between NASA and ESA to transport the collected rock samples back to our home planet. The return was originally planned for 2032, but unfortunately the project has been postponed indefinitely due to funding problems. Whether and when the mission will actually take place is therefore unclear at this stage. And until the funding issue is resolved, we will have to make do with the measurements taken by the rover's instruments, which, although astonishingly detailed, can never match the diversity of analysis available in our laboratories on Earth. Despite this, the new findings once again underscore that Mars was once potentially hospitable to life. Not only was there water here, but apparently also all the chemical conditions necessary for life to develop, and possibly over a longer period of time than previously assumed. If the supposed biosignatures are confirmed as such, this would have enormous implications. Life could then arise on planets more frequently than assumed, which would undermine the so-called rare Earth hypothesis. But the idea of panspermia, the notion that life came to Earth from Mars or vice versa, would also take on new meaning because who knows, maybe we are even dealing with two closely related life forms on different planets, which would make us Martians in a sense. In addition, even simple microbial life on Mars would raise new questions about the so-called Great Filter. If microbes can arise relatively easily, why haven't we encountered any intelligent, complex life forms so far? Well, that's all theoretical speculation for the future. And now, above all, patience is required. Previous cases have shown that spectacular finds can quickly be misinterpreted, and until the Mars samples arrive on Earth, the Perseverance discovery remains a promising indication of life, but not yet definitive proof. However, it has been definitively proven that by clicking on the subscribe button, you will never miss a new video from us again. Become part of our community now to stay up to date from now on. See you soon.